everyone, welcome to the October 20th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski as we are looking ahead to Keeneland on Saturday. Their 10-race card features a couple of stakes races, both of which are part of the late pick 5 sequence, which we will be handicapping on this forecast. Race 6 is the Perryville, which drew a really intriguing group of 6 3-year-olds sprinting the 7 furlong distance, and then also going the 7 furlongs a bit later in the card. Race 9 is the Grade 2 Raven Run for the 3-year-old fillies. Larger field there, maybe not quite as high quality or not as many familiar names as the Perryville, but still a very competitive affair. Many runners to consider in there. Craig and I actually did stakes previews of both of those races that you can find on DRF.com or DRF's YouTube channel, but the other 3 races in this pick 5 sequence, one maiden race and a couple of allowance races, definitely complicate things a little bit if the stakes weren't already hard enough, because they're competitive affairs with some interesting pace scenarios that I think we're going to discuss as we get into some of those allowance races later, Craig.
I would agree. As usual, we get the typical big fields at Keeneland. I think we got outside the stakes races, we have a couple 12-horse fields with AEs and an 11-horse field and a turf sprint. And I'm actually pretty intrigued by that turf sprint as well, as it's one without a lot of pace.
Yeah, we'll get to that at the very end of this podcast, that being the last leg of this pick 5 sequence. We'll kick things off with race 6. That is the Perryville, and I was just looking at the forecast for Keeneland because I'm always crossing my fingers that there's not going to be rain on the weekend when I check the forecast in New York. Unfortunately, that hasn't been working too well lately, as we're supposed to get more rain here this weekend, but it seems like Keeneland's going to be pretty dry in Lexington, Kentucky this weekend, so I don't think we're going to have to deal with any unusual track conditions there. The Perryville, of course, is carded for dirt, and Craig, this 6-runner field features quite a bit of quality. I guess the horse to beat is the number 1 Verifying, who was installed as the even money morning line favorite. We know that he handles the 7 furlongs. He went that trip last time in the H. Allen Jerkins, got a career best speed figure in that race that, of course, was marred by the unfortunate incident involving New York Thunder, but still came back a fast race. And he's just shown quality going all the way back to the start of his career. Arguably, he's been a slight disappointment because there were a lot of expectations around it coming into his 3-year-old season, and at the end of the day, he just has a Grade 3 Indiana Derby win in the win column, but he did run well last time, and I guess he is the horse to beat here, but he drew the rail, and I think there are a lot of other runners that have the potential to move forward.
Right, for just a 6-horse field, I would say you could probably make a case for every horse in this field, a legitimate case. I wouldn't say it would be a stretch. All of them have the credentials, and you mentioned that big speed figure for Verifying. I touched on it a little bit in our video preview. I'm a little leery of that speed figure. It's one where I think the algorithm is maybe a little bit broken because of the unfortunate New York Thunder breakdown. A horse who was well clear of the field, setting a very fast pace, and when he broke down, the figures just kind of fell apart. Obviously, it's going from a 150 pace figure to suddenly the horse that said it's not in the race anymore. So, not that he's not a good horse. He had run 118 and 119 in his 2 prior races, and I think that's more likely where he stands as a racehorse.
Yeah, I think Verifying is the horse to beat in this race. I just wouldn't want to take the kind of short price that he is on the morning line. I guess he will attract plenty of support here, being a recognizable name with Brad Cox in his corner and those flashy speed figures. But to me, he's just never been a horse that has really caught my fancy. I mean, he's a horse that typically runs well, but I think generally he's underperformed a little bit. He's most successful when he gets very good trips. We saw that too back when he was the winner after stalking a moderate pace in the Indiana Derby over Raise K. And there has been some other narrow losses where I didn't think he had that much of an excuse. So I was kind of looking for some alternatives in here. I suppose an intriguing runner that we've got to discuss, Craig, is the number 5, Dr. Venkman, coming in from California. 2 for 2 in his career, both victories by open lengths. Trainer Mark Glatt has been on a tear recently if you've been following Santa Anita. So this horse is definitely dangerous, but he's taking a big step up in class.
He is. He doesn't ship a lot, the trainer, Mark Glatt, that is, but he's won at Keeneland before with a shipper, so it's not like he can't do it. The horse has speed figures which are competitive, and he's won his 2 races with consummate ease, barely being asked late, and The big question with him is what was he beating? There hasn't been a whole lot in behind him. When you look at the chart in Timeform US from that last race, nobody's really done a whole lot of running out of that race. The 2, 3, 4 finishers that ran in behind him just have not done much. Even like I think it's a fifth or sixth horse ran third, but with a regress speed figure. And I'm not saying that I think the speed figure is wrong. I just, when you're beating up on easier competition, it's a little easier to run fast, as we see often. And I just wonder how good he is. My initial thought was to not use him at all. I'm a little nervous about doing that because he has shown some real talent, but I think he would be more of a backup, like a B or C type for me.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that. I won't be surprised if he runs well here, but I feel like he could take some money just based on the perceived potential around him, and I preferred some others in this race. In addition to verifying, there are a couple of other horses that are coming out of those early season Triple Crown preps and who actually ran in the Kentucky Derby. One of them is Confidence Game, who I know Craig and I both kind of feel this might be a prep race for something going longer down the line, but the other horse, the number 4, Raise Cane, is getting his first turn back in distance to a one-turn race since he won the Gotham so impressively by 7 lengths back in March. And not that this horse can't handle 2 turns, because he actually has run pretty well in a number of spots without winning since the Kentucky Derby, and he actually ran deceptively well in the Kentucky Derby if you watch his trip through the stretch that day. But I do think he's the kind of horse that might benefit from getting back to one turn. He has a big move on him. He typically flattens out a little bit at the ends of his races, and he's just one that I think is going to appreciate 7 furlongs. The problem, though, Craig, is there's not a ton of pace in this race.
No, we hadn't mentioned, I don't think, that this is a race that chose the blue flag for favors horses on or near the early lead. And the horse we actually have shown with a slight lead is Confidence Game, a horse who hasn't shown any real speed since the Lecomte back in January. Now, part of that's because he's been laid off for a while since the Kentucky Derby, but he had kind of changed running styles to win the Rebel, so I don't think he has a lot of speed. So, yeah, I'm totally on board with the pace projector here. I think it's going to be a very tactical race where jockeys play an influence in how aggressive they are. And I do think that is to Raise Cane's detriment. Like you, I was really interested in him, but I think he is a contender, and maybe the pace will be slow enough that it won't matter. He'll be in range and be able to flash that strong finishing kick. So I'm not going to discount him because of pace, but it is a little bit of a negative.
We're both interested in some horses that are big prices on the morning line, Craig, and I suppose they both have to deal with what could be an unfavorable pace scenario because neither one of our horses has much early speed. I know you like the number 6 Loyal Company a little bit, and he is a horse that has run well in one-turn races in the past and has a few competitive speed figures in his form.
Yeah, I really like this race too back at Ellis, the Ellis Park Derby. It was the mile race around that 1.5 turn, so a little bit of a hybrid race. He ran a big speed figure that day, a 1:15. Finished a close third that day. Regressed a little last time, but when you watch the replay, you have to go to RTN because it's a Churchill race. You can't watch that through Timeform US, but he really got out of position at the start. It wasn't a terrible start per se, but it was enough that he wound up being really wide around the turns. And I'm just willing to put a line through that race. And I like his good outside draw here. I think that Tyler Gaffleone, who rides great at Keeneland, has been really riding well, is a guy who can just work out a good trip. And I think the way he finished off that day is going to be even more dangerous at the 7 furlong distance. We've seen him win these one turn sprints before, including here at Keeneland. So I think he's one that may get overlooked because there's a lot bigger names in the field.
Yeah, I won't be surprised when he's the biggest price in the race, and I don't think he's impossible by any means. I like the number 3 Post Time. This is a horse that I know looks a little slow on speed figures compared to the competition that he's facing here, but he has been extremely impressive in all of his prior starts. I mean, he's a horse that was pretty goofy when he made his career debut, just very green through his first couple of starts, but still winning those races so easily at Laurel last fall into winter, was a very visually impressive winner of that Maryland Juvenile before going to the sidelines, and obviously something happened to force him to miss so much time during his 3-year-old season. But I really liked what I saw from him when he returned from the layoff last time at Pimlico. Again, not meeting a field of horses that is nearly as good as what he's facing in this Perryville, but the way that he advanced, just slicing through the pack before drawing off under wraps in the late stages, this is a horse that clearly has quality, and he's going to have to take a big step forward to beat this field, but you have to think that the connections are expecting a big progression because it's not like Brittany Russell to just take a shot in these races. She's generally pretty conservative with the way she manages her horses. She's a trainer that seems to be very concerned about maintaining a high win percentage, racing primarily in spots where she's going to be a heavy favorite. And the fact that they're shipping this horse in as a long shot to contest these top level 3-year-old sprinters in the Perryville, I think it's meaningful that they're expecting a good effort from post time. And in a weird way, the lack of pace in this race, I don't think it's going to hurt this horse too much, because when you watch his races, his big weapon is his turn of foot and his ability to kind of close into some slow paces that he's encountered before and break these races open by the 8th pole, taking over. And I think if they allow this horse to get into the race, be within 2 or 3 lengths coming around the far turn, that's when he's going to be dangerous. So I like post time. I'm hoping he's somewhere near that 15-1 price. Given how impressive he's been in the replays, I'm not sure that he's going to be that big a price, but even 8 or 10-1, I think would be make him interesting in here. So I like him. I also like Raise Kane. I'll probably try to key on those two. Just downgrading, verifying a little bit because I think he's not going to offer any value in this spot.
Yeah, I would agree. You kind of sold me on post time when I originally did the video preview. I overlooked him, and maybe that's why the morning line's so high because of his lowish speed figures. But he's been winning by a lot, doing so easily. So again, I wouldn't want to get knocked out in the first leg by him. And we'll recap this race when we come back through at the end. But I think it's a really tough race. I just want to get through this race, so I'm probably going to use most of the horses, at least in some strength.
Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence. Race 7 is a maiden special weight event for the 3 and up runners going a mile and a 16th on the main track. And Craig, this is one of those maiden races for the older horses where there's nobody that's jumping out at you saying, I'm ready to break my maiden today. I mean, I guess your eye initially just gravitates towards a horse like the number 8, Mount Craig, who kind of is a clear standout on speed figures. I mean, he's run a series of triple-digit TimeformUS numbers. I mean, the number here in 2-back, that 110 at Saratoga, is significantly higher than everybody else in this field, but he has just proven to be a horse that is content to stay a maiden. He's had a bunch of chances to break through, and he just seems to constantly settle for those second and third place finishes. Not to say that he hasn't met good horses before, because he has, and you could make the argument that he's just now finding himself in a race where there are no rivalries who seems like a promising horse, or Dreamlikes who beat him 3-back, or even Moore's Law who seemed like a talented horse for Chad Brown. This might just be the kind of race that a horse like Mount Craig is supposed to win, but he's not the kind of horse I like to take a short price on.
No, he's not for me in this spot. He's a confirmed money burner. It's not so much that he's run second or third 8 times in 10 starts, and that he's done that while being pretty heavily bet several times. Coming into the last race, sure, rivalry looks good, and he looked good that day, but he looked just as good on him as paper before the race, and was no match. And it just seems like he's a horse who's content to run around in the pack more so than to take the race, take control of the race and see it out. So at what's going to be a short price, I'm not going to use Mount Craig on my ticket, and I'm looking at this race as kind of a separator for me because I don't particularly like any of the favorites, and I'll kind of get into that before I get to the horses I like. I'll start with Ben Franklin, a horse who I suspect is going to take some money for Ken McPeak, second time out. He was up against a slow pace. He was really finishing off his race. But when I dug in the formulator, the stats are just terrible with older horses like this. McPeak is just 1 for 24 when he stretches out to a 2-turn race in the second start of a horse's career in maiden special weights. So I don't want a whole lot of that. I've already said why I don't like why I don't like Mount Craig being a money burner.
You've renamed him.
Yes. Mount Money Burner.
You don't want your name to be attached to a horse like that.
No, we got to get rid of that. We much like the Maryland sprinter who wins a lot. Wonder where Craig is. And number 9, Furious Anger, another horse who I think he's actually the morning line favorite. Um, I'm just not sure why he's even the morning line favorite. He's coming out for Dale Romans. He was in a race where he set just a crawling pace last time. He got run down. Romans doesn't do particularly well with this move. Third time maiden special weight, first time route. He's 1 for 12. The horse that won wasn't all that good, just kind of caught a weak field. So, and his speed figures are way behind what the others in this field have. So, I'm really against the favorites. Before I get to the horses I like, I don't. I'd like to hear how you feel about those.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the Timeform US VPs, it does seem kind of crazy that the morning line maker Nick Tamaro made the number 9 Furious Anger and the number 6 Ben Franklin so short. But their buyer number, it's one of those situations where you must have done something different than buyer in that September 23rd Churchill Downs Maiden Special Weight race, because that is the fastest buyer coming into this race, both of these horses. And when I look at that race, Craig, I kind of lean more towards the number you gave, because maybe, I mean, there are some lightly raced horses coming out of there, and clearly Ben Franklin was a first-time starter. So I suppose there's the possibility that those horses all improved, but it does feel like a lot of horses improved, maybe more so than you'd expect, to justify, I think it was an 83 buyer that the winner, You Ain't Poppin', got in that race. So I kind of lean more towards your point of view, or the Timeform US Speed Figures point of view, that might have been a weaker race than it looks. And also, as I'm looking again, that's a race that got a big pace downgrade because they were going so slowly early. So that's another reason why the Timeform US Speed Figure is held down a little bit. Those horses are all stretching out in distance, as you said. It's interesting. I was looking up those stats for Ken McPeak, and you brought up a distinction that I didn't really jump on, but Ken McPeak actually has fantastic sprint to route stats with maidens in their second starts overall. But it's interesting that you just narrowed it down to 3-year-olds, because all of the winners, when you look at the sample, are 2-year-olds. It's kind of a weird thing that I hadn't really thought about too much, but I'm just pulling it up in Formulator again, and you're completely right that he just has so much more success within that sample with the 2-year-olds. Actually, I think he's had 14 winners overall over the past 5 years, and 12 of them in that sample have been 2-year-olds. So just something interesting with Ben Franklin. I won't be surprised if he improves, but if he's going to be a short price in here, I kind of agreed with you. Also, same thing with Furious Anger, a horse who does have route pedigree, especially on the dam side. His European sired dam is a half sister to Materiality and My Miss Sophia, who were graded stakes winners routing on the dirt, I think both for Todd Pletcher. But he's a son of violence, this horse. So I just wonder about the stretch out for him. And I wanted to keep an open mind with regard to some bigger prices, Craig. I wonder if we're going to be on a similar horse here, because I think it kind of fits both of the horses, the types of horses we like to look for in these races. But I'm very interested in the number 3 Dissolved, who goes out for the Norm Cassie barn. This just feels like a horse that wasn't really ready for his debut, didn't take much money in either start so far, but at least he showed speed and faded first time out sprinting at Ellis. And then last time out, I thought he took a big step forward subtly, because he again chased a pace, showed speed, and got tired at the end, but he was facing a much tougher field that day. The winner of that race, Highland Falls, is a well-bred Godolphin horse that I know he lost his next start, but I think he's going to have a big future for Brad Cox. And the second and third place finishers, Mo Fight and Rivalry, they came back to win some strong maiden races in fast time in their next start. So that was a really strong maiden race on August 26th at Ellis Park. And this horse got a competitive speed figure despite fading to 5th that day. And when I look up stats for Norm Cassie, something that I think people don't talk about that much is how trainers do with their third career start. You can look that up in Formulator, and Norm Cassie has great numbers with that move. Maiden third start in dirt routes. He's 7 for 29 over the past 5 years with an ROI that's nearly $3. So given the inside draw, going this tricky distance where they head right into the turn, I like Dissolved in this spot.
Yeah, we're on the same horse as our top pick. So you saved me a lot of talking because it's a lot of the same things. The only thing I'll add is the fourth place finisher from that race has also come back to win with an improved speed figure of 104. That one was in one of those high price maiden claimers at Churchill for 75,000, but It's pretty good. So yeah, I definitely like Dissolve. There is another horse that I want to use, actually two, but another one that I think is set up to run a big race, and that's a horse right inside of him, Single Dot Yacht, for Tom Drury. He's just a horse who his running lines don't all look all that great. He hasn't really been close at the finish, but he tries two turns for the first time. He's improved his TimeformUS speed figure every single time out, including a big 16-point jump last time. So he's just a horse who I think is improving and could be dangerous and is going to be a price. And the other one I would use, not so much as the other two, the 2 and the 3 horse, would be on the outside, the 11 horse, Alexander Helios for Safi Joseph. He's just a horse who, as he's come back as a 3-year-old, his first race on dirt was pretty good. He ran a 96 speed figure at Gulfstream, even though pretty well beaten. That was a pretty strong maiden race for the early summer at Gulfstream. Then he tried synthetic and he basically matched his speed figure. So I'm not going to totally write him off third start of the year off of that long layoff because he's not that far off on speed figures either. Obviously, the post isn't great, and we could say the same about Furious Anger going the mile and a 16th at Keeneland with that short stretch, but he's definitely going to be a price in here.
Yeah, I mean, as for Single Dot Yacht, I agree. He would also be my second choice in this race. I would kind of be choosing between him and Dissolved. Single Dot Yacht, he was going to win two back at Ellis Park. If you watch that race on July 16th, he got completely shuffled out of position, losing a good 5 to 6 lengths around the far turn, and actually did really well to re-rally after that. He was going to win that race, and then he came back last time and just caught a really tough field. We've already talked about Mo Fight being a talented runner, I think, who also goes out for Norm Cassie, and he just couldn't really follow that foe home, but did run an improved speed figure last time. So I think he makes a lot of sense. And Craig, we don't what's the word I'm looking for? Color code or give the designation for these maiden races having a fast pace. But this does feel like one where they could be moving up front, and that's one potential knock against Dissolved, because I think there are some horses drawn towards the outside who are going to be gunning to the front, like Furious Anger, particularly the number 12, Create Trouble, who kind of has to go from the outside, Malibu Springs, who has speed. So my one big concern with Dissolved is that this pace just really heats up and falls apart, even though I like him in this spot and I think he's going to run an improved effort. I worry about the pace a little bit. That's not a concern with Single Dot Yacht, who does have that off-the-pace running style. I guess it also helps the horse that you mentioned last, the number 11, Alexander Helios. And you're right. I mean, he's faced some good horses during his career. I just wish I had seen him do more running in a few of those races. When you watch his replays, he's just this big, lumbering horse that looks like he has zero speed or turn of foot. He just kind of runs along towards the back, makes a move, but it's just kind of always looks like he's running in slow motion when you watch his replays. So, I mean, if this thing falls apart, I guess he's the kind of horse that could clunk along for a piece or maybe a big piece of it. But watching his replays, I ended up liking him less than I thought I was going to. I'll throw out one more crazy horse that is not an A by any means, but he's the kind of horse I could throw in as a B or a C. The number 10, My Sanctuary, who I know just looks ridiculous on speed figures, but he's a horse that showed some signs of life in that maiden specialweight event as a 2-year-old, facing a really good field, determinedly, Shopper's Revenge, Sun Thunder. That was a slow-paced race where he was trying to close from far back. That performance isn't quite as bad as it might look. And his only other dirt race came off a long layoff at Ellis Park, when it was just one of those Ellis races that was a total merry-go-round. Nobody changed position, and Chris Landeros just basically gave up on the far turn that day. He took a step forward last time at Kentucky down subtly, and just is a horse that, if this thing falls apart and becomes like a subpar race that earns a lower speed figure, he's the kind of horse that I think could come clunking along, because these Ian Wilkes runners, they tend to take a number of starts to really find their stride or figure out who they are, and he just feels like one that has upside in a race where I'm looking for somebody that has upside.
Yeah, I like what you said there, and that even a running line in his second race, his first dirt race, which would just look terrible and wouldn't lend anybody to want to go watch the replay. Sometimes there's things to see. So I just wanted to make that point that I'm glad you brought that up. You can't just go by what's on the paper sometimes, no matter how bad it looks. Sometimes there is some more substance to the race. So good point there. And in a race like this, where I'm definitely trying to beat the favorites, I'll take all the price horses I can get on my ticket.
And I'll just say before we move on from this race, I think we both kind of skipped over or didn't mention the number 5 Malibu Springs, and he's a horse that I could see taking money in this race given his speed figures with Flavian Pratt getting aboard. I know we got a number that makes him look like a major player in this race last time. I think that's a little phony. It was an off-the-turf race, just 2 rivals in there. The winner, Quality Chic, is like this proven... He was like the Mount Craig of New York. I mean, he's like a proven hanger who finally broke his maiden on that day with just nobody trying to get in his way. And it was also a very speed-favoring day at Aqueduct, so Malibu Springs, even having all of that in his favor, still was easily beaten by that horse. So he's one that I think looks competitive on paper. When you do some digging, he becomes less appealing.
Yeah, no argument for me. That's exactly why I didn't bring him up. I think that last race is phony. That's all I really have to add to that.
All right, let's move on to the middle leg of the sequence. Race 8 is an allowance event. N3X is the allowance condition, going a mile and a 16th on the turf course for the fillies and mares. And this is a pretty competitive affair. You can make a case for a lot of runners in here, Craig. I guess... I mean, I'm not even sure really where to start. I guess the number 9 Haughty is a horse that could take some money in this race because she's just been on this steady diet of stakes races since she broke her maiden as a 2-year-old. They've tried some tough spots with her. Obviously, she ran pretty well as a 2-year-old in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf, and I think that's kind of prompted the connections to have confidence to continue running her in stakes races after that. She did win the Lake Placid last year with a favorable setup, but this year she's just been a cut below. She's been beaten by a couple of her stablemates, technical analysis on 2 occasions, and it feels like they're just getting realistic now, dropping into an allowance race, which she's eligible for, and that also gives her the opportunity to get Lasix for the first time, because having been in stakes races her entire career, she's never had the opportunity to run on Lasix. So there are definitely some things working for Haughty in this spot. I've got to say, though, I wish that I had seen her do a little more running in some of her races this year.
Yeah, when I look through her Timeform USPP, she just hasn't really progressed much at all. She obviously moved her speed figures up a little bit to her 3-year-old season. She won. One of her wins was over that Penn turf course, which was just an absolute bog. So I don't know how much stock you want to put into that one. So yeah, I'm very lukewarm on Haughty. Kind of like she's the lukewarm morning line favorite in here. She'll probably be bet heavier than that with Chad Brown, Tyler Gaffleone, all those graded stakes running lines, and in fact being a grade 2 winner. But I'm just very lukewarm on her chances. I won't be shocked if she wins. I mean, she certainly has the credentials to do so, but not a horse I'd be excited to bet at. I would guess she'll probably wind up being like a 5-2 favorite in here if I had to put money on it. The horse that interests me most is the horse we have shown on a clear lead on the pace projector, and a horse who is basically the only speed. I mean, when I look through the PPs, maybe the 8 horse we have shown in second could challenge her, but I doubt it given the way she's run her last 2 races where she's rated off of slow paces with success. So why wouldn't she do that again? And not so close, just ran a monster speed figure last time, a 120 at Saratoga. She did it in a race that's very strong. The 3rd place finisher who is in this race has come back to win from there. The 4th place finisher, another Chad Brown horse, has come back to win, and Chili Flag ran second for Chad Brown yesterday. I don't have the number for that one, but in an allowance. So she's clearly coming out of a strong race, and it's very easy for me to envision the exact same scenario she had last time, where she's all alone up front and is able to finish off the race really strongly.
Yeah, we're going to disagree a little bit here. I don't like Not So Close in this race. To me, she just got the right trip last time at Saratoga. That was a race where her main rival, Chili Flag, was significantly compromised, and I thought Chili Flag was pretty disappointing coming back and losing at Belmont at the Big A earlier this week, beaten by a horse that was basically a former claimer. Other runbacks from that race have been better. Sister Luann obviously ran well in her next start. We'll talk about her in just a second, but actually, I'll talk about her right now because I think Sister Luann's presence in this race is an important one for Not So Close, because if you go back just a couple of races in Sister Luann's PPs, she also is a front runner. I know they did not ride her that way last time in the One Dreamer, but she did show speed, stalking the pace. That was kind of a boggy course that they might have been a little conservative over. She got the job done that day. But now she's switching back to Luis Saez, who actually tried to send her in that Not So Close race 2 back, and Not So Close was just a little bit quicker, and having drawn outside of Sister Luann was able to kind of shut the door on her heading into the clubhouse turn, and Sister Luann was kind of caught in the pocket behind her. This time, Sister Luann is drawn outside. Saez gets to apply that pressure on the outside. So I think it's going to be a different situation for Not So Close, where she's not going to be able to boss around her main pace rival. So I think Not So Close was a little bit lucky to get the job done last time. She was a great price that day. She's probably going to be a shorter price this time. And also, when I go back and watch her Ellis Park race 2 back, when she was beaten by Sin Filt, who's also in this spot, I mean, I don't see why she's supposed to turn the tables on that foe. She got arguably set a faster pace than she did in the Saratoga race last time, but that was also going a little further, a mile and a 16th, and Sinfilt was actually shuffled back around the far turn that day, had every excuse to lose, and still was able to angle out and beat her. Since then, Sinfilt has come back in 2 stakes races, and I thought she ran pretty well against a good horse in New Year's Eve 2 back. And then last time at Kentucky Downs, that was one of those days where the rails were down at 0 feet. She was never on the inside. The winner of that race, Vergara, rode the rail the entire way, and she stayed on pretty well to be third, going a distance that probably is a little too far for her. I like her cutting back to a mile and the 16th. She gets Flavien Prat. I just think Sinfilt makes a ton of sense in this race, and with Haughty in here, she might not even be the favorite. So she's a horse that I want to lean on a little bit in what is a race that I think a lot of people are going to be tempted to spread more than that.
Yeah, I could see that because there are some other horses. I think the one horse, Lovely Princess, is a horse who's dangerous that we haven't talked about. She's coming out of some smaller stakes races where she's run second 3 times in a row, but she certainly has the credentials and the speed figures to win here. Has a nice post position, particularly if Not So Close and Sister Luann do wind up hooking up on the front end. So she's not one I would totally dismiss either.
Yeah, and Lovely Princess, when she won here back at in April at Keeneland, she just got such a perfect trip that day. When you go back and watch that race, I mean, Mise en Scène should have won. I mean, she was a little against the pace and was just flying at the end, but Lovely Princess got that inside-out rail trip and was able to beat her. And Lovely Princess has been consistently running well since then, but I just feel like she's so exposed at this point, and everyone's going to assume that she's going to get another great trip drawing the inside, and she's one that I could use as a B or a C type because she's so logical, but I feel like it's all going to be built into her price, and she's just not going to be value in this spot. I do want to talk about a few other horses, Craig. Well, actually, just one in particular. The number 10 Walkathon is a horse that I don't think we should go without mentioning because she looked like she was on the cusp of becoming one of the best 3-year-old filly turf horses in the country last year when she beat McCulloch in the Regret Stakes. That was her 3rd victory in a row. She had run extremely well in both prior victories on turf in Kentucky, and then something went wrong. She was supposed to run in the Saratoga Oaks over the summer. I forget if she was entered and got scratched or wasn't even entered in that race, but had a setback, was off for a very long time, took her over a year to get back to the races. We finally saw her last time at Kentucky Downs, and that probably was just a prep race, but it's still hard to know what to expect from her now, second off the layoff.
It is, and I won't be surprised if she runs well, but it's from a tough post, the 10 hole, and I mean we've kind of hinted at it. This is a very, very strong allowance race. I mean, obviously a non-winner's a 3x. We don't see a ton of those anymore, but it has graded stakes winners. Its race rating's a 118, so I would be very I'm not very interested in Walkathon just because I think it's a really tough spot to basically would have to run a career best off of well over a year, second race off a year layoff, well more than a year even. So she's not for me in here. I won't be shocked if she wins, but I'm just trying to play a manageable ticket, and it just feels like way too tough a spot for me.
Yeah, she's a horse that I really did have high hopes for last year, and it's hard to have confidence at this point. I will say she came off the layoff last time at Kentucky Downs wearing front wraps, which is probably not a great sign. I guess you could take a look at her, not obviously before you play this pick five sequence, but see if she's wearing them for this race. But definitely some questions that she's got to answer in this spot. We'll see what price she is. Let's move on to the ninth race, the Grade 2 Raven Run, the feature race on this Keeneland Saturday card. Also going the 7 furlong distance like the Perryville. This one for the 3-year-old fillies. And Greg, they're all going to have to get around the number 7, Alva Star, who has just done little wrong in her career and feels like she has really stepped forward in her last couple of starts for trainer Brett Brinkman, especially when she won at Delaware. That was a big breakout performance, beating older horses by open lengths. And the last time out, she carried that form up to Saratoga in the Prioress, beating Dazzling Blue, who she's facing again here. Got to the front end that day and was able to just boss around that field. But when you're winning a stakes at Saratoga by nearly 9 lengths with a 121 TimeformUS speed figure as a 3-year-old filly, you're doing pretty good. And if she runs that kind of race here, they're probably not going to beat her, but she's got to stretch out to 7 furlongs for the first time, and there is other speed in here that could keep her honest.
Yeah, there is. She was able to run that race. I think it may have been a little bit of a speed favoring track. We have it coded in bright red. Probably not that strong, but I don't know if it would have mattered on that day as easy as she won. But I do have some real concerns with her getting that 7th furlong because she's blazing fast. There's usually a point where horses like that just it's too far, and I wonder if that is going to be the case for her. It's a race where she's going to be a short price, and there is some other speed in here. I That last race was really strong. I mean, one of the horses in there has run back already, came back with a much improved speed figure in an allowance race at Churchill. So I don't want to totally dismiss her, but if you've seen our race preview or when you see it, I didn't pick this horse on top. It's just one of those I will use her in limited amounts because I like a lot of horses and most of the legs. I don't want to get beat with her, but I'm going to have to be right in some other legs with some price horses if she wins.
Now, I guess we should now talk about the other horse coming out of the Prioress, Craig, the number 6 Dazzling Blue, who I don't like at all in this race. I know you like her a little bit. I mean, I guess I don't like her because she's just a horse that has a big following since she won her first few races so impressively. And it just feels like she always takes more money than I think she's supposed to. She certainly did last time when I thought she was 3-5 for no good reason in the Prioress. I mean, Alva Star came in with better form than her, and she somehow went off at 7-2. We'll see if that switches here with Alva Star beating her so decisively. But Dazzling Blue is another horse that I'm not sure if she gets better with 7 furlongs, and she's gonna have to find a way to run down Alva Star as another horse who wants to be forward in this race.
Yeah, I wound up picking Dazzling Blue because I actually really liked her race in the Victory Ride, a race where I didn't like her at all. It was a race where, for the first time in her career, she was able to rate a little bit off that very fast runner who eventually won that day. And I liked how she finished, and I'm willing to forgive that last race where she wound up wide. She was chasing a horse on a track I consider speed favoring. Didn't do a whole lot of running that day, but while I agree some of her trips look good, she didn't run particularly fast. I still like that Victory Ride, and I personally think you can put a line through that last race. And I think this might be the time where she does get overlooked a little bit.
And well, I agree that she has not had ideal trips on a few occasions, but it's kind of her own doing because she does have a tendency to break slowly. She hopped a little bit at the start last time, it seemed like, but I mean, she had broken worse in her prior starts, especially as a 2-year-old. So, I mean, maybe she's getting over it, but it's just a concern I have with a horse that I think is going to take money in this race. The number 4, Vava, Craig, I think we both agree is just extremely logical in this spot. With the pace signed on, she's supposed to get the right trip. She's proven that she handles 7 furlongs. Actually, 7 furlongs is probably her best distance. And yeah, she got a perfect trip last time at Charlestown, but it was just another really solid effort from her. And I mean, she's going out for a bar in Cherie DeVoe that just seems to have nothing but success in stakes races recently, so she makes a lot of sense.
He does for sure, and some people might, turn their nose up a little at Charlestown, but the Charlestown Oaks is a pretty strong race year in and year out. It's one of the few graded stakes at that track. It always draws a good, strong field. Hoosier Philly was actually in that race, didn't do any running that day, but just shows that kind of the quality that it gets. And Yeah, this race just seems perfect for her. The way the pace could set up with plenty of speed. I mean, even if Alvastar is in front without being challenged, she's going to go fast. So I would imagine that the pace is going to be quick. And it's just hard to see Vava not getting a good trip and being a factor at the end. Her speed figures, while nobody's is with Alvastar's last race, all the other races in her page are she's fine with them running in the mid teens. And if that seventh furlong slows Alva Star down at all, she should be right there.
Yeah, another horse that I think we have to discuss is the number 8, Lady Radler. She ran a big 113 TimeformUS speed figure in the Dogwood, going this distance at Churchill last time. She was 23 to 1 when she won that day. Probably too big a price given her prior dirt effort being somewhat competitive against that field. But Craig, I just never like to take horses like this that were big prices last time. Now their form is exposed. They're going to be shorter prices against a much tougher field. And also, she's a horse that is really aggressive. I mean, when you watch her races, she wants to run off. She wants to show a lot of speed. And I thought Jesus Castellon did a great job of just getting her covered up and behind horses last time. And she was eager and keen, but she was like a pulled back arrow on a sling, just ready to be fired at the top of the stretch. When she finally got out at the top of the stretch, she was able to make that explosive kick away from the field. But that's a tough trip to always work out in horses like this. And if she winds up dealing with more kickback or getting further back, I wonder if she's a horse that could eventually get into trouble trying to rate in these races, given how keen she gets. She's not really for me in this spot, but I understand why people might want to respect her last race.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to red board much. I don't think we did this race, but I actually bet her last time off of those dirt races at that big price and was rewarded. But I'm getting off the train here because, as you said, she kind of rated last time, but when you really watch that race, did she, or was it just that there was a really fast horse in here, a horse we talked about last week who wound up proving troublesome for Caravel last week in that race, BG Warrior, who's just a really fast filly, and it seems like it was more of rated because she had to by necessity than it was on purpose. And given her draw to the outside, I can see a race where she's just right there with Alva Star, and that's kind of how I'm leaning in playing horses like Dazzling Blue and Vava, who I expect to be getting better trips in behind. And really, Lady Rattler didn't run that fast. He only got a 113 TimeformUS speed figure that day, and she would need a career best to beat some of the others.
I'm interested in a horse on the outside, the number 9, Ancient Peace, who is a little bit of a wild card in this field because she's never gone this short before. They're obviously trying something new, but I think this is a cutback that could really work for this filly because when you watch her dirt races, kind of like what I was saying with Lady Radler, she's a horse that's very aggressive and she wants to run off in the early stages of her races. They let her do it in that Santa Anita race back in April, and she ran one of the best races of her career, opening up early and just dominating that race in a basically just a walk in the park through the stretch. Nobody could get close to her, and she ran, I thought, deceptively well in that Summertime Oaks back in June when the pace was honest. She was right on top of it, fought back in the stretch, just beaten by a horse who got a better trip than she did. And then last time out, I think she confirmed in that Remington Park Oaks that a mile and a 16th on the dirt is just far for her. And when you look at her physically, she's more of a compact, smaller filly that has a really nice way of moving, a powerful stride to her, but I think there's more speed than stamina there. It's interesting they've never tried to go shorter with her. I think that was probably because they initially viewed her as a turf horse. She does have plenty of turf pedigree, so I understand that. And I think it just got them running in longer races from the start. But I think turning back to the 7 could work, especially given the fact that she's drawn in the far outside post position. It's going to give Ricardo Santana some options to not necessarily have to go forward. He could potentially work out a stalking trip while not having to take kickback sitting outside of runners. So I think she's shown the ability to be competitive here, and she's going to be the right kind of price, I believe, for me to take a shot in this race.
Yeah, she's one I actually was at her last race in the Remington Park Oaks, and so I'll do an anti-red board. I bet her that day, and she did not win, so now I'm even. But she was no match for the winner. But when you actually watch that race, she dueled with a horse who was even money, a Brad Cox ship in, put that one away. That one actually wound up basically being eased. Um, didn't really do any running after dueling with Ancient Peace. So yeah, she's one I kind of overlooked because I just assumed that Remington Oaks wasn't a very strong race. But I could see it on the turn back, and particularly because she draws an outside post, it's almost impossible for me to see her not getting a good trip.
Let's move on to the final leg of this sequence, race 10. It's an allowance event, nometers of 2 other than, going 5.5 furlongs on the turf for the older runners. And this race was a real problem for me to handicap, Craig. It's a difficult race to close out the sequence because a lot of the horses that are going to be the shorter prices, I just do not trust at all. And I guess we'll start that conversation with the number 11, Fauci, who reliably shows up and runs his races more often than not, but he just never wins. I mean, it's been a long time since he's won a race, going back, I think, all the way to 2021. And I mean, he's gotten a number of good trips, but he just gets there at the end. And I think when you watch his last race at Saratoga, it's a perfect example of who Fauci is, because he was rolling down the center of the track like he was going to go buy those horses, and he just could not get past the Suis Summer in the final stages. Now they're putting Lasix on, I guess just trying something new. I don't know why they've never used Lasix with this horse before. Maybe I can't, even going back to early in his career, I don't think they ever tried it. So, I mean, it just feels like a little bit of desperation at this point from Phil Antonacci and the connections. He's drawn outside, does have one of the top riders on board, but he's a closer in a race that doesn't feature much pace at all. So it's easy to see him once again getting victimized by unfavorable circumstances. And even if the pace was hot, I just don't trust him to actually win.
No, I don't either. And Fauci won't be on my tickets. And maybe I'll wind up looking foolish, but he's going to be a favorite in here for sure. And for all the reasons you said, I'm just not a fan. There is very little pace in here. He's a horse who comes from well out of it, and a horse who's looked like he's going to win not just his last race, but you could find another 3 or 4 in his performances where with a furlong to go, he looked like a cinch, and he just doesn't get the job done for whatever reason. So I'm not interested in Fauci. I'll start with the horse I am most interested in, and that's because of the pace projector, and it's the 8 horse Counter Strike. He's shown second sitting just off the flank of a huge long shot, and here's Zumbi, the 3 horse. But I actually think Counter Strike is pretty good. I'm ignoring his last race at Kentucky Downs, where he was wide over one of those ridiculously speed favoring tracks. He just had no chance. It was a race won by Gear Jockey, a horse that loves Kentucky Downs that day, a big purse grade 2. But when you just look at his race before that, his speed figure that day, his running style, I just think he makes a whole lot of sense in here. I think that 114 he ran is totally legit. He won easy at Ellis Park, and it's hard for me to, like I've said about a few horses, including your horse in the last race, hard for me to envision him not getting a perfect trip given his outside draw. And maybe you would argue that he's a horse who doesn't always show speed in his races, but it just feels like he almost has to be up close here.
It does feel like among the major contenders, he's the horse that could be most forward, even though they haven't necessarily ridden him that way in his recent races. He's not this deep one-run closer, which it feels like so many of these are. And I agree with just about everything you said, Craig. I mean, he was facing a tougher field last time at Kentucky Downs. I don't care much about that race. And it just feels like a horse that really improved since they tried sprinting at 5.5 furlongs on the turf with him. I mean, they had raced on synthetic sprinting. He had gone longer on the turf, but had never really tried 5.5 on the turf. And it just feels like those races from May through August at Churchill and Ellis, they all make him pretty competitive in here, arguably the horse to beat. So I think Counter Strike is very interesting in this race. And Craig, I want to talk a little bit about that horse that's shown leading on the pace projector, because I know that the number 3 Zumbi looks kind of ridiculous at first glance. He's never run a speed figure that really makes him competitive against this field, going out for a barn that probably isn't that familiar to most. This horse, though, when you go in Formulator and you look up his dam, Sweet and Cozy, a horse that some people might remember, she raced at Keeneland, sprinting on turf a number of times for the same barn was always a gigantic price. And even though her turf record just in the career box might not look quite as good as her synthetic record, she would almost always outrun her odds when they ran her on the turf. She actually won a race going 5.5 at Keeneland at 37-1. She ran in the Franklin Stakes against a really tough field and was not disgraced, finishing fourth at I think 95-1. Just a horse that when they switched her to turf, she would typically outperform expectations. And I think it's interesting that this horse who's been campaigned exclusively on synthetic is now trying turf, getting into a perfect situation where he's one of the only horses that has speed in a race full of closers, and he's got a capable rider on board in Luan Machado who knows how to take advantage of a horse's speed. I just think this horse should not be totally dismissed, and I will not be surprised when he really outruns his odds in this race, just given how the rest of this field looks. So he's one that I'm definitely going to be including somewhere.
Well, I'm glad I almost mentioned this horse, but I had a feeling you might go in that direction given the dam. So yeah, I'm using Zumbi because for one, she's going to be alone, or he's going to be alone on the front end in a race that just has no real speed, and it's maybe she'll need to slow it down. But I'm not one who automatically assumes that synthetic form transforms to turf. And I think there's a very, very real possibility he could be better on the turf. I don't know if he'll be 30-1 as lone speed, but he is going to be a price in this field, so he will definitely be on my tickets. And I think the only other horse that I'm going to use, I don't particularly love him really, is Axelm. He's a horse who I guess he's named after Pete Axelm, the longtime horse player and NFL guy, used to be on TV, but he's a horse who just fits in here. He has a little more tactical speed than some of the others. Again, he raced at Kentucky Downs last time, wasn't on the rail, so I don't want to totally throw him out because he does run speed figures that make sense, and I prefer him much more than I do Fauci.
Yeah, when I looked at him, I was expecting to like Axtell more than I eventually did. When you watch those races at Gulfstream Park where he did sprint on turf the only two times back in February and March, boy, he got some great pace setups in those races, especially the last time when they just went fast up front. And I mean, he just was like running in a different race than everybody else as he mowed them down at the end. And he was kind of ridden as a closer in both of those races. So I wonder how much speed he really possesses going this distance. I guess Sai is going to try to keep him more forward, but he's not really naturally a horse that wants to be up close in these faster paced races. So I was expecting to like him more than I did when I really did some digging into him, but I guess in this race, he's one that you do have to consider. I mean, another horse that I'm kind of against is the number 10 Gregory's Pride, who I think has to take more money than he is on the line at 10-1. I mean, when you look through his form, he's a horse that, I don't know, maybe because he's got a person's name in his as his name, but I mean, it just seems like he's always overbet. He doesn't even win that often, but I mean, you go through his card and you can barely find a race where he's over 4-1. So I mean, he's a horse that feels like he has to take money in this race, especially with Flavien Prat aboard. But he's one that I think got very lucky when he won at Keeneland going back to April. So I don't really like him in this race. The number 7 BD Valesky is a horse that I would like quite a bit if there was a little more pace because he is such a one-run closer. He actually had real trouble when he finished behind Counter Strike 3 back. Not so much 2 back when he just didn't run his race, but he was very impressive winning last time at Churchill. He feels like a horse that's gotten back into good form recently, but it's hard to see the trip coming for a horse like that who just doesn't have any early speed. One more horse that I'll throw out, Craig, that I think is a major contender in this race that I'm going to use is the number 1 Will to Run, who is another closer in a race that doesn't feature speed. But at least we know that he's a best as a turf sprinter, and in his last couple of turf sprints, he's encountered some pretty good fields, beaten by Mr. 2 back, and then beaten by Coppola before that in a race where that horse just put into freakish performance. He ran really well at Keeneland, going to 5.5 back in April, and he's racing now as a first-time gelding, switching into a barn of Tom Amoss for the first time, and sometimes when horses have changes like this, it can change the running style a little bit, and I wonder if they're going to try to keep this horse a little bit closer, given how savvy Tom Amoss is with knowing how to place his horses. So he feels like one that might be sitting on a better effort here, but it's tough to project who's going to get the right trip in a race like this.
It is. I could see Will to Run getting a decent trip from the inside, and it wouldn't take that much of a change from him to actually get a nice pocket trip as opposed to dropping out to last as he has in some occasions and where he's shown on the pace projector near the back on the inside. So I've got no problems with him. He's going to be a price as well. So it's an interesting sequence and topped off by maybe the most puzzling race of all of them.
Yeah, it's a really tough way to close out this sequence. And with that, Craig, let's do a little bit of a review to go back to the beginning and discuss how we might attack a pick five sequence like this. It's not easy, and I think you do have to choose some races where you're really going to narrow things down, because there's no one race where there's a favorite that you can lean on, unless you, I mean, at least it's not a sequence that sets up that way where there's an obvious horse that everyone is going to want to lean on. They're all really competitive races. Maybe some people will lean on Verifying in the first leg. I don't know. I didn't really see it that way. I know neither of us are going to play it that way, but it does feel like the kind of sequence where this ticket could easily get pretty bloated.
Yeah, this is one I will definitely have to use Ticketmaker for. And just kind of, like I said, the one maiden race is a separator for me. I'll start with the Perryville. I'll probably use four horses in there. I'm not going to use maybe even five. I'm not using Confidence Game, a horse who I think is merely in here to prep. I just don't like him coming out of the Kentucky Derby in this spot. But all the others I would use in varying strengths, but I'm going to lean on Loyal Company and Raise Keen as my main plays. And I would say I'm going to play these tickets so the horses I say are my A's, I would have to win 3 out of 5 with backups winning 2 of the races. In the maiden special weight race, this is the one where I want to do some separating. I don't really like any of the short prices. I'm going to lean on the 2 and 3, Single Dot Yacht and Dissolve. They are horses I actually really like. I'll be playing this race individually for sure. The only backup I would really have in here is the 11, Alexander Helios. If the race falls apart, I think he could get the right trip, and I think he's a little better than what he looks on paper. The very tough allowance race, which could easily be a stakes. I'm going to spread a little bit in here. My top pick and an A horse for me would be Not So Close, because I can just envision a trip where she gets the same thing that she did last time. But I also could see a trip where Sister Luann just presses her and is the better horse. I could see a race where Sinfeel, I guess how you say that, gets a nice trip in here and is able to beat Not So Close again. So those would be the horses I would lean on. Maybe have a couple backups, and Lovely Princess would be one. Um, Haughty would have to be a real stretch. I could see her winning, but I wouldn't want to get knocked out totally if she were to win the race. So she could be a backup for me. In the ninth race, that Raven Run, the horses I'm going to lean on would be Dazzling Blue, who I said I'm giving an excuse to for her last race, and Vava, who I think makes a lot of sense in here. But I would still use Alva Star, and I could see Ancient Peace as well, so they would be my backups. And then the last race, I'm going pretty skinny in this one. I would lean on Counter Strike as my A horse. Axum would be more like a B, and then that would be it. I would probably, oh, Zumbi, of course. Zumbi would be like a B as well. And that's it for me. They're the only three I'm going to use.
Yeah, it's a tough sequence to put together for sure, and I think it's one where you just kind of have to go with your opinions. And if you like prices in races, just upgrade them, because they're going to give you the value. And in sequences like this, right, you have that temptation to use a lot of horses. I think you have to let your expected value be the way you separate your horses in these legs and decide which ones to lean on. And that's how I'm going to do it. In the Perryville, I want to lean on the two horses that I like, Post Time and Raise Cane, and if I can get through this first leg with those two, I feel like I'll be in decent shape the rest of the way. In race 7, Craig, we like the same two A horses, the 2 Single Dot Yacht and the 3 Dissolved. I also do want to use some others in this race. The number 6 Ben Franklin, who I do think has the right to improve second out, stretching out. I'll use a little bit of the 8 Mount Craig, because he does kind of tower over this field on form. And then the 10 My Sanctuary, who is just that long shot that I think has a license to take a step forward. forward. In the 8th race, this is the one where I'm going to try to make the ticket more affordable because this is a race that I feel pretty good about. The number 7, I'm probably butchering her name, but Sinfield. I just think that her form is really trending in the right direction, and she's going to get the right kind of trip in this race. So she's the only A for me. If I was going to use a few backups, they'd be horses like the 1, Lovely Princess, the 9, Haughty, perhaps Walkathon on a really skinny backup ticket, but she's a horse that I don't have a whole lot of faith in. But I really want most of my play to go through the number 7 in the 8th race. In the Raven Run, I like Ancient Peace at a price, but I primarily want to key her with Vava. They'd be the 2 A's for me, with Alva Star being a B, and I'm going to try to get through the race primarily with those 3. Maybe a C type could be the number 3, Nom de Plume, who I did not mention when we were analyzing the race, but just a horse that has upside for a barn that typically can outperform its odds. So that's a horse that I could throw in on some deep tickets or potentially use an exotic vertical wagers within that race. And then race 10, that allowance race that closes out. It's really tough. I'd probably use as my A's the 1, Will to Run, the 3, Zumbi, and the 8, Counter-Strike. And then the backups would be Axthelm, BD Valesky, and Fauci, but it's a really tough race to narrow things down to close it out. Well, Craig, that takes us to the end of this Pick 5 sequence. It was not an easy one, but hopefully we gave out some good opinions, and we will, of course, I think we'll recap some of these races on the Pacecast next week. We'll probably do a bit of a combo Pacecast next week where we take a look at a few notable stakes races, like probably these 2 that are run at Keeneland. I don't think there's that much high-level stakes racing being run around the country this weekend, but I know, Craig, we also do want to start talking about the Breeders' Cup next week, and I think we're going to release the Pacecast maybe one day later next week, so we can comment on those pre-entries that are supposed to come out early on Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to them because this isn't a Breeders' Cup year with a ton of star power like we've seen in years past. But as a bettor, I'm really interested in seeing the fields and who's coming over from overseas, both Europe and Japan. I think it's going to be a fascinating betting cards, I should say, 2 of them.
Well, everybody, thanks for listening to the forecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch that Breeders' Cup focused Timeform US Pacecast coming out in the middle of next week.